Welcome to Wash Talk, the Car Wash podcast. I'm Maddie Weiner, and today I'm joined by Harry Caruso, founder and CEO of Car Wash Advisory. Harry, thanks for coming on the show again.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So on today's episode, we're finding out what a car wash consultant or advisory firm does. So my first question, what is the purpose of a car wash consultant or advisory firm?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think in the most basic of senses, right, a consultant or advisor should be able to come into any sort of situation, and it can be divided into operational or transactional, which would be more of what we do, come into a situation and provide either better or faster results than otherwise possible. I suppose maybe they don't provide that, but at that point, they're not really a great advisor or consultant, so that
Yes.
should be the purpose.
Understand.
I guess in the car wash industry, there's a ton of them across both operational and transactional. Operational sort of consultants would be looking at increasing car count or dollar per car.
Okay.
Transactionary would be the closing of a deal, whether it be a sell-side M&A deal or an acquisition.
Got it. Okay. So what are the pros and cons of a seller trying to sell his or her location or locations without the use of, such a firm?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest thing to address first is what is the con of using an intermediary? Well, the con is that everything we'll discuss or I'll mention here in terms of pros is has the ability to be just as negative as it can be positive.
Okay.
If it's not the right advisor. So it's very, very important to get the right person. Now, we're a company. That being said, the other obvious cost or con is that of the fees. So there is a cost. The pros is that if you do it right, you should not have to take a ton of your time as an owner away from actually running the business, which needs to still be run.
Yeah, huge advantage.
Huge.
Yeah.
And along with that, you mitigate a ton of the risk, which is employees finding out, managers finding out that you may be considering selling, not to mention opening up your books to competition. That should all be mitigated away by a good intermediary. And also, which is, I guess, most topical with most people, is you should get a better price and better result by way of deal terms, offers, and closing.
Oh, okay. Yeah, all good stuff for an owner, that's for sure. Okay.
Yeah.
So you talked about the fees. What are some of those typical fees and commitment of resources required to work with such consultants and firms?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. And it's really cool because I think 3 years ago, the answer would be different, or at least less expansive.
Okay.
Because this industry has now grown to the point where you have the entire spectrum of transactional sizes. Some of these transactions, by way of like Mr. going public, for example, was unheard of just a few years ago. So I think in terms of fees, it's best looked at if you divide it into certain tranches. The big guys, the JP Morgans, right, the Citigroups, the Goldmans are actually in the space as advisors, advising on what I would call sort of mega deals, which are over 500 million. Those fees are 1% to 2% roughly.
Okay.
There's another segment, which is 100 million to 500 million, which would be classically defined as middle market investment banking. And those can be anywhere from 3 to 5%.
Okay.
And then there's also lower middle market, which is that of 25 million to 100 million, let's call it, which is 4 to 6%. And then there's brokerage, which is under 25 million, which is absolutely anything goes, and we've seen everything in the world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a very hard question to answer because now the space covers everything from $1 million transactions to billion-dollar transactions, which
Got it.
one fee structure doesn't really fit.
So if you're working with a broker, they would set their own terms then, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
It's a free-for-all on the lower scale of it.
Okay.
I think there's no standardization.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy to think that way. And there's a lot of academic arguments for one fee structure over another. Should you get paid more if we get over this price? Should you? I think the key is to work with people that you trust, probably, more so than worry about the fees. The fees should be trounced 10 times over if it's a good advisor.
Right. Makes sense, yeah. So in your opinion, what's the ROI for operators, in working with one of these, a consultant or an advisory firm?
Yeah, so ROI is tough to measure because there is that inherent cost. So what you could do is you could say, hey, I was offered $100 million before bringing an advisor in. We got 120 after. His fees are $2 million. So for a $2 million cost, I get 20 million more. And my ROI is whatever that is, 1,000%.
Okay.
You could. The problem with that is an offer is not the same as a closed deal.
Right.
This is where you run into this sort of paradox because there's no true way to actually measure what would have happened by way of closing based on an offer.
Yeah.
So it's really tough to put a numerical amount on it. I personally will speak towards the fact that I think by far the biggest value a advisor can bring to the table is less so the incremental monetary increase, which is immeasurable and should be given, but more so the finality of actually closing the transaction. And in that case, infinite.
Right. Yeah, of course. No. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Because, and like you said earlier, the operator, they take some stress, a lot of work off of the operator in terms of, making sure all their ducks are in a row with lawyers and accountants and all that stuff, I would imagine.
All the fun people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly. So, Harry, how can an operator ensure that he or she is partnering with the right consultant for their needs?
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, you should talk to multiple people. Right.
Okay.
And that's obviously not industry specific nor advisor specific. You should at least have more than one reference point. Any advisor who stands by whatever services they're offering should have no problem with that. In doing so, I would say that what almost is not frightening, but a little bit frustrating is people are often very, on the operator side, they're afraid to get into hard, deep questions, and you shouldn't be, right?
Okay.
Like, get after it. These are the people that you're going to be trusting with, in many cases, the largest transactional event of your entire life.
Right.
So if you can't ask that up front, that's an issue. The only other thing that I think is commonly sort of overlooked is a lot of people will immediately gravitate towards whoever has the solution, whereas I think it's very important to find a match by way of advisor where it's not so much somebody who has a preconceived solution to what you think may be the transaction structure or architect that could solve the problem, but more so as a listening ear to understand what is the problem and what are the many ways that this could be solved, or what is the goal and how do you get there.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Just to follow up to that, what are some of those deeper maybe questions or things to bring up that maybe people might be a little hesitant?
Yeah, so it really, it's a great question. It spans all the way from the most surface level stuff, which is like, well, how long does this take? And when am I going to know definitively? Are we over? Is it done? Is this just going to drag along forever? So timeline questions on the most surface of levels. And then on the deeper levels, you get to stuff like, well, proper licensure, non-cash agreements, a lot of ancillary services. Are you providing the legal counsel, right? The accountant stuff, post-sale tax planning. And then I think one more thing worth noting is a lot of times this is not as simple, especially in today's world. It's not as simple as one person owning all of these washes.
Yeah,
right. There's partners, there's groups, there's investors. So I cannot stress this enough. It's so important at the beginning to understand what the implications are for the group and not just for one person.
Yeah, no, and that's a great point. And yeah, covering all your bases is huge because you said it's the biggest transaction in a person's life. So yeah, very interesting. Well, Harry, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. We really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure.
Awesome. Our guest today has been Harry Caruso of Car Wash Advisory. For more information, visit carwashadvisory.com.